This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, good morning all. This is the session 2 of day 1, and here we have Dillii Maharjan. He is an Oracle database consultant, Oracle 11G certified master, and founder of Nepal Oracle User Group. He is working since 2002 as a database professional and having experience working with MySQL and Oracle databases. He has a very good knowledge of shell scripting, Perl scripting, and he is my colleague and my friend at PTL. Today he will be speaking about his experiences on how virtualization has enhanced and helped his the work for the DBAs. He will be sharing some experiences of him, and I will not take much more time of you guys, and I will hand over the session to Dillii. Over to you, Dillii.
Thank you, Hemant. Good morning, everyone. You can see the screen, right? Hemant, can you confirm that you can see the screen?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank entire member of Tech for providing me an opportunity to speak here. And I would like to thank all of the attendees for attending this session. My name is Dillii Maharjan. I'm from Kathmandu, the capital city of Nepal. And today I'm going to talk about how virtualization has enhanced my DBA jobs. So basically this slide is about my personal experience, and I will explain how I came across the use of virtualization in my DBA jobs. And I must say that this session is not about in-depth knowledge on virtualization and its feature. Rather, this session is about how I use virtualization in my day-to-day job, to do practices, to simulate scenarios, and to do some of the test. And this session contains why I need it in first place and how I fall in love with it in first glance. And I must admit that virtualization has changed my work life and I enjoyed my career a lot. Okay, let's begin. Let's begin with my brief introduction. I've started my IT career in 2002, and since 2006, I have been working as an Oracle database administrator. And these are the few Oracle certification I have done. I have done OCP 9, 10, 11, and 12, Oracle RAG certification. And beside that, I have done Oracle 11G certified masters in 2017. And last month, I was rewarded with Oracle as Associates. Beside that, I have done some Oracle Cloud certifications. And right now, I am working as an Oracle database consultant for the PTN group from last 2.5 years. Okay, these are my LinkedIn profile URL, Twitter ID, and blogspot blog URL, which I use to post blog on it. So basically I use dilliidba.blogspot.com and www.oraclecloudadmin.com. Okay, so these are the contents, these are the topics for this slide, this session. We will start with the virtualization introduction. We will go through the dual boot, VMware, Oracle VirtualBox. I will show you the disk speed test, SATA versus SSD. Then we will get introduced about Docker's architecture, Docker component and its advantage, and Docker uses in my DBA jobs. And we will see some demo also, and I will show you how I have allocated resource to the Docker environment. And after that, we will end up with a reference and a Q&A. Okay, let's begin with the introduction of virtualization. So in general meaning, the virtualization refers to the act of creating something virtual. It's not a actual, not a real, it's a virtual version of something. So let's say if I do a hardware virtualization, it means I'm going to create some virtual machines. So rather than it's a physical machine, I will have a virtual machine after doing hardware virtualization. And as per Wikipedia, the IT virtualization began in the 1960s. So in terms of in the virtualization environment, we used to get two types of machines. So we have a host machine. That is the machine that we use for the virtualization. So basically on the machine on which we install virtualization software is called as host machine, and the machine which we install on top of virtualization software and on top of host machine is called as a guest machine. And we have a lot of type of virtualization, and among them desktop virtualization and containerization are the two famous ones. Okay, let's begin with the dual boot. So in 2001, I was learning Oracle 8i, and the same time I was doing Macromedia Flash 4, Visual Studio, and Fox Pro. So I was working on Fox Pro and all of them, and meantime I was learning Oracle 8i. So the operating system I was using at that time is Windows 98. And since I was learning Oracle 8, I need to practice it. So I tried to install Oracle 8i in Windows 98, but unfortunately I was not able to install it because Oracle 8i does not support on Windows 98. So I clean up my Windows 98 and I install Windows 2000 Professional. And I was able to install Oracle 8i over there, and I was able to practice Oracle 8i, but I was not able to work on Macromedia Flash 4, Visual Studio, and Fox Pro because these application doesn't properly support on Windows 2000 Professional. So I have an option either to stick with Windows 2000 and practice Oracle, or install Windows 98 and do Macromedia Flash and Visual Studio and forget about the Oracle. So for the first time, I heard about the dual boot. So basically, dual boot is nothing more than installing two operating systems in a single machine. So I have a I have installed Windows 98, and on top of that, I have installed Windows 2000 Professional. So whenever I power on my PC, I get a black screen with the option of the operating system I have. So I have a Windows 2000 Professional, Microsoft Windows 2000 Professional, and Microsoft Windows 98. So whichever operating system I choose, I will boot it up and I will do my job on it. So basically, it is nothing more than installing a two operating system in a single machine. And the basic architecture, underlying architecture I was using is that I have a hardware that is 128 MB of RAM, 733 megahertz of Intel Pentium processor, and 20 GB of Sata Hard Drive. And inside the C drive, I have noticed one file called boot.ini. And boot.ini includes both of my operating system and the location of the boot sector which need to be booted. So whenever I choose Windows 98, it take me to the boot sector location of Windows 98 and it get booted Windows 98. And in the similar way, whenever I choose Windows 2000 Professional, it boots to the boot sector of Windows 2000. So my needs are something somewhere else fulfilled. So I was able to do Oracle 8i practice, and meantime I can do Macromedia Flash action scripting on Macromedia Flash, use Fox Pro and all this stuff. But I was dealing with some of the difficulties. Basically I have a four difficulties at that time. The first difficulty is I cannot boot both of the operating system at the same time. So either I have to start Windows 98 or Windows 2000 Professional. And the second difficulty I was dealing about is that switching from one OS to another OS take me entirely 10 minutes. So basically, if I was using Windows 2000 Professional and I need to switch to Windows 98, then I have to shut down the Windows 2000 Professional entirely and start Windows 98 from the beginning. So the entire process takes at least around 10 minutes. And Hemant, I'm getting some of the noise, background noise. Okay. Uh, can you mute someone? It's a Parth. Parth, can you mute? Okay, we are back. So these are the two difficulty I was dealing with. So first one is I cannot put both operating system at the same time, and second one is switching from one OS to another OS takes at least 10 minutes. And the third difficulty I was dealing with is that I have a very limited disk space. It's around 20 GB of hard drive. So maintaining both of the operating system is very hard to me because it takes a lot of space. And the fourth and the last problem I was dealing with is that whenever I need to transfer any file from one OS to another, it is very hard to me. Basically, if I was on the Windows 98 and I need to transfer a file from Windows 98 to Windows 2000 Professional, then I have to copy my file to floppy disks, then shut down Windows 98, start up Windows 2000 Professional, and copy file from floppy disks. So it's a very hard job at that time. Anyway, it was going on, and in the 2006, for the first time, I heard about the VMware workstation. At that time, I was learning Linux, and I was working as a support technician in one of the ISP in Nepal, internet service provider in Nepal. So during my job time, I need to support the client. So I must need to use the Windows XP as an operating system, Windows operating system, because most of the tool we use to support the client works only on Windows operating system. And I, I'm learning Linux, so I need to practice it also. So for the first time, I heard about some of my senior colleagues told me about the VMware workstation, and I installed VMware workstation in 2006 for the first time. And I installed Ubuntu operating system inside my VMware workstation. Okay, this is the basic underlying architecture of the VMware workstation I was using at that time. I have a hardware, and on top of hardware, I have a host operating system. So Windows XP was my host operating system. I have a hypervisor software, that is VMware Workstation, and on top of the hypervisor software, I have installed Ubuntu as an guest operating system. So my life became easier because I can run both of the operating system at the same time, and transferring file from one operating system to another operating system is pretty much easier in comparison to dual boot, and my life became easier. So I was practicing Linux and doing my job at the same time. And in 2012, for the first time, I heard about Oracle VirtualBox. So in 2012, I purchased MacBook Pro. So I was using Mac OS as an operating system. And I came to know that the Mac version of VMware, it is known as a VMware Fusion, is a paid version of software. So I cannot install it, and I cannot purchase it also because it is not affordable to me. So I was searching for an alternative of the VMware Fusion, and I came to know about the Oracle VirtualBox. And I installed Oracle VirtualBox in my Mac OS, and I found Oracle VirtualBox pretty easy to use. And I must say that it's perfectly suited for the home user. So if you are a home user, if you are trying to do some virtualization, then try Oracle VirtualBox because it is free to use and it is open source. And I must admit that I rarely had any issue during the 7 years of usage. So I use Oracle VirtualBox for entire 7 years, and I rarely faced any issues. I cannot remember any of the issues I have faced. And at that time, I was using Mac as my operating system, and inst I installed Linux operating system inside the Oracle VirtualBox to do some Oracle practice and lot of them. So the basic underlying architecture is very much similar. It is similar with the VMware workstation. I have a hardware, and on top of that, I have a host operating system that is my Mac OS. And on top of that, I have a hypervisor software. It's a Oracle VirtualBox. And on top of that, I have a guest operating system where I install CentOS and install Oracle 11G inside the CentOS operating system. So I was pretty happy with the Oracle VirtualBox. And there are a lot of benefit I was getting from Oracle VirtualBox. The first benefit is that it is free of cost and it doesn't require any license or something else. And I must say that Oracle products are super compatible with the Oracle related software. So I have installed Oracle database over there, database inside my guest OS, and it is super compatible. There is no issue at all. And I must say that Oracle VirtualBox is super compatible with macOS. I haven't had any issue on it. And I have built Oracle single instance Oracle database with ASM and without ASM. I have built Oracle RAC, Oracle Data Guard, and lot of things over there. But I have noticed that uh, working with Oracle VirtualBox is pretty slow. So the same thing I have encountered in the VMware Workstation and VMware Fusion also. So they are pretty slow. So if I run one VM, then it's slow, but it's okay. I can just simply work on them. But when I start a multiple VMs, if I start a 2 or 3 VMs at the same time, then it literally stops working. So I was not able to work at all if I start 2 or more VMs. Okay, so for the first time in 2015, I purchased SSD hard drive of 256 GB. And I must say that SSD changed my life entirely. And I have never imagined that SSDs are so faster than I have ever expected. I have never expected it is so much faster. And I must say that after installing SSD in my laptop, I was able to run multiple VM without any issue. So if you see the slide, then this is the comparison between SATA hard drive versus SSD. So if you check the write speed of SATA, then it's around 47.6 megabyte per second. But SSD have 345.9 megabytes per second of write speed. And if you compare the read speed of SATA, then it's only 52 megabyte per second, but SSD have 500 megabyte per second. So it's around 9 times faster than a SATA. So once I install the SSD in my laptop, then everything changed. I was able to run the multiple VMs. I was even able to run a 3 VM at the same time. And I was able to practice my rack environment, data guard environment, and most of the thing. So previously, the slow I was feeling was due to IO bottleneck. So once I changed my SATA with SSD, all of the IO bottleneck become vanished, and I was able to do a lot of practice on it. So basically, I suggest everyone to purchase a SSD and put it on your laptop, on your desktop, even desktop also, and give your laptop and desktop a new life. So once you switch to SSD, your laptop and your desktop become super fast. Okay, here is the story of Docker. So for the first time in 2019, I heard about the Docker. Till that time, everything was working fine. I was able to practice a lot of things in Oracle VirtualBox. But in 2019, I heard about the Docker. Most of the people are talking about the Docker, and people around me are talking about the Docker a lot. So I switched to Docker. I tested a Docker, and there was no big reason for switching to Docker, except it is a popular. So it's a popular, so I switched to a Docker. And immediately after switching to Docker, I have noticed that the the image that is being used by the Docker containers are pretty small, and they do not need operating system inside a container. So I have found that it is very quick to start. And I must share that previously I have a very limited resource in my laptop, so the disk space is very limited in my laptop. So whenever I create any VM, and once I complete my tasks, I used to back them up in my external hard drive. And till 2019, I have around 2 terabyte of Oracle VM backups. It includes Oracle, Oracle 11G, Oracle 11G with ASM, Oracle 11G RAG, Oracle Data Guard, and everything. Everything I have a backup of a VM images, Oracle VM images. So it's around 2 terabyte of size, and I have a I have a very hard time managing them. So once I start using Docker, I have noticed that the Docker image is pretty small in size, and in comparison to VM, it's a very much smaller. So it's a very due to its architecture, it has a very small footprint. So if I have to install Oracle 11G in my Oracle VM, at least I have to allocate 1.5 to 2 GB of memory for the single VM. But due to the architecture difference of the Docker, it has a small footprint, so it requires very least amount of RAM memory over there. And I have felt that starting a Docker image, starting a Docker container is like starting an app in your own laptop. Let's say if let's say I have a Mac operating system and I cannot install Oracle in Mac OS itself. So I installed Docker, and on top of that, I pulled the Oracle Linux image, Docker image over there, and install Oracle over there. So starting a Oracle in a Docker container is like a starting Oracle that is being installed on Mac OS itself. So it is so much faster. So the underlying architecture is I have a hardware, and on top of hardware, I have a host operating system. So in my case, I have a Mac OS as a host operating system. And on top of that, I have a Docker application and Docker image. And on top of Docker image, I have a Docker containers. So basically containers are nothing more than the bundle of binaries and libraries that the application depends on. So if I install Oracle 11G as an application, then the container contains all the required binaries and libraries to run my application successfully. And you can install Docker on any operating system. So you can install it on the Windows, you can install it on any flavor of Linux, even Debian and Mac, and even you can install it on AWS and Azure also. So we have a Robbie. Robbie, can you mute? Okay. So these are the components of basic components of Oracle. Sorry, it's a Docker. So there are a lot of components of a Docker. Among them, these are the popular 5 components. So let's begin with the Docker container. So basically, container is a unit of software. Basically, it contains all required codes and its dependencies so that the application in the containers run quickly and reliably. So the container is just a bundle of code and its dependencies. And the second component is Docker image. So a Docker image is basically it's a file. So it is very similar to VM images, but it contains a multiple layers for the writing purpose and all this stuff. So this is used to execute inside a Docker container. So Docker image get execute inside a Docker container, and the size of the Docker image file is pretty small. And we have a third component, Docker Hub. So Docker Hub is a central repository for sharing Docker images. So if you want to use a hub, then you should sign up for it. And once you sign up with them, you can use a login to download any Docker image from Docker Hub, and you can even upload it to your private repository also. And the fourth component of Docker is volumes. So basically, when we run a Docker container and we do a lot of changes over there, it is not getting reflected in the Docker image itself. So basically, it is being saved on the Docker volume. It's a read-write layer of a storage that is being used inside a Docker container. So Docker volumes are the mechanism for storing our persistent changes. So whenever we run a Docker container, we start a Docker container and we do any changes, it will not lost even you stop the Docker container. So until you destroy the Docker container itself, the changes will be stored persistently. And after that, we have a Docker networking. So Docker networking is a way of communicating between the Docker containers. So basically, Docker containers are isolated and independent to each other. And if I need to communicate between the Docker containers, then I need to use Docker networking. Let's say if I have a, let's say I have a 3-tier architecture developed simulated in a Docker container or developed in a Docker container, then from frontier to middle tier and middle tier to backend tier, I have to communicate and I need to use a Docker networking for that. So basically it supports bridge, host, overlay for the clusters and all this stuff. And you can set a none if you do not want to use a networking, and you can use a Mac VLAN also. There are a lot of advantages using Docker. So among them, I have listed the 5 top advantages. These are first advantage of using Docker is its portability. So once you install Docker and tested your application inside a Docker, you can just export it and give it to anyone else. So it works perfectly as it works in your environment. So you do not have to, we don't have to worry about the underlying hardwares and underlying operating system and anything else. So it basically works as it is, and it is very highly portable. The second advantage is its performance. Basically, Docker image can be compared with the Oracle VM image, but the Oracle VM image contains operating system, and whenever you start the Oracle VirtualBox VM, then the entire operating system will be started with its background processes and all this stuff. But in case of Docker, we do not need any OS inside it, and it shares the kernel of the host operating system itself. So it is very small in size and very quick to create and start. So it do not have a lot of dependency on it. So it is very highly responsive. And the third advantage is agility. So if you check that there are two top advantages which provides our development environment agility, right? So it's very much portable and it has a very high performance. So these two advantages provides our development environment very agile, and we can develop and deploy right software in right time with the advantage of portability and its performance, high performance. And the fourth advantage is that it is isolated. So its isolation is its fourth advantage. And the Docker containers are isolated from each other. Let's say if I have to install a three-tier environment, I have to deploy three-tier environment in the Docker container, then I can deploy three containers and they are isolated and independent from each other. In the same way, if I have to install, let's say I have to install Oracle, different version of Oracle database in a container, then let's say if I am planning to install Oracle 11c, 12c, 18c, and 19c in a Docker container, then I will create 4 Docker containers and install over there. And they are isolated from each other and they are independent from each other. Let's say if I run a Docker 11g container and do some of stuff over there, and it is independent from 12c, 18c, and 19c. And the fifth advantage is scalability. So it is highly scalable. So either if there is a demand from my application to scale out, then I can easily scale out. And if there is a very low demand, then I can easily scale it. So uh, scaling containers is just a simple one-line command and you can easily scale it. Okay, these are the Docker uses in my DBA job. So these are the type of tasks I use Docker for. So first task is that running more workload on the same hardware. So basically I have a basic hardware and I want to use it as more as I can. So I can use it. I have a desire to use it in an optimal way. So Docker allow me to use a more workload with the same hardware. I can install multiple version of Oracle database. Excuse me. I can start all of them at the same time and I can do a lot of tasks with the same existing hardware. The second usage is building proof of concept. So let's say if I have to apply patch on one of my customer. So basically what most of the people do is they will go through the readme files and list out all the commands and they will prepare an action plan, right? And they will implement it on the dev environment, after that UAT or production environment, or whatever the environment is feasible in the client end. So even though the action plan is created, it is not tested. All the commands that is written in action plan is not tested, right? But in my case, if I have to do the same job, I will start up one of the Oracle container with the required version of Oracle. Then I will execute all of these commands before writing it in the action plan. So all the commands that I grab from the README file is being tested in my local environment and is updated, is written in the action plan. So it is a proof of concept. So that way I will be sure that all the commands that is in the action plan works perfectly. There is no syntax error and there is nothing problem in the syntax in the command itself. And the third usage is app isolation. Let's say if I have to uh, simulate some two-tier environment. So at that time, I will deploy 2 Docker container and I will build as a frontier and a backend. So let's say if I have to develop a one web server and the backend server, then I will pick up 2 of the Docker container and install web app in one of the container and the backend database in over there. So it simulates exactly as the physical machine, isolated physical machine. So for the app isolation, I use a Docker mostly. And the next usage is rapid deployment. So whenever I need to deploy something in a rapid fashion, something quickly, then I use a Docker most. So few weeks back, I was doing blog on data guard validate command. So at that time, I need a data guard environment. So at that time, I pick a Oracle 19c image, and using that image, I deploy two container for the one for primary and one for the standby. And I guess within 6 to 7 minutes, my environment is ready to use. And once I'm done with it, I can easily destroy it. So the last usage is easy destroy. So once I am done with my usage and once I am done with my work, I will easily destroy my Docker containers with a single command. It's basically Docker container RM and the name of the container. So these are the basic uses of Docker in my DBA job. Okay, let's switch to the demo. Before demo, I would like to share some of the screenshot from the Docker. So the first screenshot is about the Docker images I have in my laptop. So I have Oracle 11g, 12c, 18c, and 19c. These are the Docker image files. And if you check the size, then the 11g is just 8.76 GB and 12c is 14.9 GB. 12c is 14.9 GB because I have done a lot of experiment over there. And 18c is just 13 GB and 19c is just 10 GB. And I must say that these Docker images are created using a traditional way of creating Docker image. You can say it a traditional way, because what I did is I just pull up the Oracle Linux 6 Docker image, and on top of Oracle Linux 6, I install Oracle 11g, 12c, 18c, and 19c in the similar way which I use for the Oracle VM. So I took all the steps, likewise configuring kernel, installing all dependent package, then executing run installer. I followed each and every steps that I used to follow in the Oracle VirtualBox. So that's why the size of the VM is a little bit bigger in comparison to the real one. So the screenshot below shows the Oracle VM of 19.3.0 Enterprise Edition. So it's an Enterprise Edition. Let me get the pointer. So this one is the Enterprise Edition. This one is the Enterprise Edition of the Oracle 19c. And this is very much similar with the 19c image above. But the size of the 19c I have installed is 10.5 GB, whereas the size of the same 19c is just 6.51 GB. Basically, in this case, I have followed the recommended way of creating a Docker image. So basically, I execute around 2 or 3 commands. After that, the Docker image is ready. So everything is done in a Docker way rather than my personal way in the top of this, in the top screenshot. So this is the resource I have allocated to the Docker. So basically, if you see, I have allocated 4 cores of CPU to the Docker and 3 GB of memory and 1 GB of swap space and 192 GB of disk space for the Docker image. Okay, so these are the screenshot of the Docker container being started and Docker list of the container being started. So if I have to start the Docker container, the command is simple: Docker container start and the name of the container. In my case, I have Oracle 11g, 12c, 18c, and 19c container being created. So I can start them with Docker container start, Oracle 11g, 12c, 18c, and 19c. And once the containers are start, I can view the list of the running containers with Docker PS. So if you execute Docker PS, it will show the container ID at the left and the name of the image file that is being used, the commands that is being executed, and the creation of the Docker image. So this is the time when I have created Docker image. So if you see that Oracle 19c is just created a minute ago, and the image 18c is created 2 months ago, 12c is 3 months ago, and 11c is 3 months ago. And after that, this is the status. So the Docker container is up and running from 6 seconds, 3 minutes, and 3 minutes, and 3 minutes. And these are the ports mapping, right? So this means that 15,219 port, network port of my host operating system, right? That is the Mac operating system is bind with 1521, that is the listener port of Oracle 19c Docker. So whenever I need to connect to Oracle 19c using some clients like SQL Developer or SQL Plus or something else, I need to use port 15,219. And in similar way, 15,218 for 18c, 15,212 for 12c, and 15,212 for 11c. And once the Docker container are up and running, I have to execute Docker exec, I for interactive, option I for interactive, option T for TTY, and the name of container and the bin bash to get a bash terminal. And once I get a bash terminal, I can switch user to Oracle and do the database operation over there. Okay, let's switch to some of the demo. Okay, this is my next machine where I have a Docker running over here. So I would like to share the resource I have allocated for it. Okay, so these are the resources I have allocated for the Docker. So I have a 4 core of CPUs, 3 GB of memory, 1 GB of swap, and 192 GB of disk space for disk image. So you can use Docker from GUI itself also, but I prefer to use a CLI. So let's first see the images, Docker images I have. Docker image ls. And all the commands are pretty much easier. So if you check the Docker image ls, then it will give the name of the image I have in my machine. So here is the Oracle 11g, 12c, 19c, and Oracle 18c. So these are the Docker image of Oracle database version created using a so-called traditional way. So this is the Oracle database 19c created in the recommended or the preferred way of creating Docker images. So if you check the size, it's just 6 GB, 6.5 GB, whereas the same 19c, same flavor of 19c, same version of 19c is 10.5 GB. Okay, let's start the containers. Let's first show the containers, list the containers. CUNT. So these are the containers I have been using right now. So I have Oracle 11g, 12c, 18c, and 19c. So Docker containers. And as I have already mentioned that I have created Docker containers for primary and standby. It's a Oracle 19c primary, and it's a Oracle 19c standby. And I have a container for the Oracle 18c Express Edition. I have created container for Javix client, and I have a lot of containers. Okay, let's start one of the Docker container. Docker 20. Okay, started 12c, 18c. All my Docker containers are started within a few seconds. Okay, let's connect to them, connect to their bash. Docker exec hyphen interactive hyphen t, and the name of the container, Let's copy it to reuse on next terminal. Okay, I get a Oracle 11g terminal. Let's make it 12c terminal. 18c terminal. 19c terminal. Oops, it's already, I'm inside Oracle 11c. So, okay, I will execute Oracle 19c over there. Docker exec-it Oracle 19c. Okay, I have Oracle 11g, 12c, 18c, and 19c terminal. So let's switch user to Oracle, start listener. Oops. Okay, I can start my database. Okay, my Oracle database 11g is up and ready. 12c is also up and ready. 18c it's in mounting state. Okay, it's up and ready. And I have Oracle 19c up and ready also. So let's connect to them using SQL developer. So if you check the connection strings that I have been using is for Oracle 11g. This is the name of the connection, username is syst, and I'm using hostname as a local host. So basically inside the Docker, the hostname I use is a local host, and the port I am using is 15,211 because 15,211 is mapped with 1521 port of the Oracle 11g VM. So, sorry, Oracle 11g container, and the SID I use is a Oracle 11g. So let's connect to them. Oops. Now you can notice that with the 3 GB of memory, I can start all version of Oracle database. So 11g, 12c, 18c, and let's take from version. Let's check the version. So it's 11g, it's a 12c, it's a 18c, 12c, 18c, and it's a 19c. Once I am done, just shut down the database. Docker ps. So this will show the list of the containers that is being running. So Docker container container stop. We'll see. Docker PS. So 11, it's 19C is already gone. So 19C is already stopped. I guess 18C is also stopped. Or we have 12C and 11C left. So one thing I would like to mention is that all the changes you do inside a Docker container is persistent, and it is not the case that it will get destroyed after you stop the Docker container until you destroy the container itself. So let's say if I have to destroy the Docker container, I have to execute, let's destroy this one JABX client. So if I have to destroy all the changes, then Docker container rm JABX client. Now all the changes is destroyed. Otherwise, if you stop the container, then all your changes will be stored persistently. Okay, this is the demo. Let's close it. Let's back to the slide again. Okay, these are the reference I have used to prepare these slides. If you want to learn more about them, virtualization, Docker, then just go with them. This is the best URL for the Docker. So docs for docker.com get started over to. This is the URL for the Docker, and rest are for the virtualization and all this. Okay, let's begin with Q&A. If you have any questions or you want anything else from me, then you can ask.
Okay, guys, if you have a question, you can write down that into the Q&A box, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay, I saw one question. Is that Docker container is basically in which technology? So Docker container is also a virtualization technology. So and it is very enhanced and advanced form of virtualization. So basically, it is used for I forget the term. It's basically used for the microservices. So basically, you can host services inside a container, and the best part of it is it's a portable and it's portable and has a very small footprints. And for the people who works in the software development, they have a very huge advantage of using this type of Docker containers. Okay, so any book related to Docker? So right now I do not have book related to Docker, but I recommended you to join for some of the video courses. There is I attended a video courses of Linux Academy a few months back, and I have heard that they have renamed the Linux Academy to something else. I cannot recall the name itself, but if you go over there, then you will get a nice overview of the Docker. Okay, so Post Pandey have asked, how is it possible to run 4 Oracle instance with only 3 GB? Post, I even have run it on the 2.5 GB also, but I didn't take a risk for this session, so I just increased it to 3 GB. So that I already have mentioned that the running application in your Docker is like the running application in your host machine itself. Manish is saying that there is no audio. So guys, are you able to hear me? Hemant, can you confirm?
Yeah. Yes, you are audible, and that question was about when you started your session. So you are
Okay. So yeah, Yeah, the Docker containers uses very low resource, so it's possible to run all 4 Oracle instances with the 3 GB of RAM. What is the major difference between virtualization and containerization? So virtualization, in case of virtualization, we have a guest operating system, and it has its own operating system and its own kernel for it. So in case of containerization, we used to run our image in the container itself. So basically containers is the collection of, it's a bundle of binary files and its dependent libraries. So the basic difference is that I can say it's as a advanced form of the virtualization. Resource allocation, sorry. Resource allocation to Docker will not be available for the base OS, as this happens in VM like VMware and Open VirtualBox. Is it correct? Yeah, I haven't felt so, because if you allocate a resource 3 GB to the VirtualBox, let's say VirtualBox, and until and unless you use the resource inside the Oracle VM, Oracle VirtualBox VM, it will be available to the host operating system. That is my personal belief, and I have seen such scenario in my work environment. So basically, the resource that is being allocated to VirtualBox is not the reserved one for the virtual box and the VMware only. It is a shareable, and it will be available to the host machine also. Can we use Docker container for ML application? Yeah, definitely. You can use Docker container for anything else. So basically, if you once start using it, then you will able to get the idea of the Docker advancement and all this stuff. You can easily use Docker container for any sort of application. Okay. So each container have separate IP. Yeah, each container have its separate IP. It's a, you can say it's some local sort of IP address that is being maintained internally, but we do not care about these IPs. And if we need to access some port, then we can use a bind. We can bind the port easily with the host operating system. So likewise, in the demo, I have shown that I was able to connect to the Oracle database using localhost and the port I used for the binding. Can you give me the sample? Okay. Can you give me the sample scenario we can use container database for production use beside for the development environment and read on that? Yeah, I must say that I have not seen yet where the container database Oracle database in the production environment has been used in the container itself. But I have seen a lot of database in the virtualization environment using the VMware EXXI and a lot of things. And I'm sure that in coming days, there will be definitely use of Docker containers in the uh, Oracle database being installed in the Docker containers. So right now I haven't seen any of them, and as I have mentioned that I am using it for my test purpose, for the learning purpose, and all this. What is the purpose of? So actually, Docker uses host kernel resource, hence it is handy to operate. Yeah, it's a Docker uses host kernel, so it's very handy and it has a very low resource consumption. What is the purpose of Docker host? So uh, actually, I'm not clear about the Docker host. I haven't heard about it. I will search about the Docker host and get back to you. And how to install Oracle in Docker? Okay, Ajay, if you want to learn to install Oracle in Docker, then I have a blog. I have created a blog for it, and you can follow the blog. Okay, I guess we are running out of time, so I would like to reply all the questions in offline. So if you have any question, you can reach to me in the LinkedIn. So this is the LinkedIn address, my LinkedIn address, and this is the Twitter address, handler address. And if you want to learn about the Docker, I have done some post in the my blog. So dillidba.blogspot.com. can visit over there and get some idea about the Docker images. Okay, Hemant, can you confirm that? Do we have some additional time or?
Yeah, we can have 5 minutes more if you still want to answer some questions.
Okay, thank you. So so each container have the separate IP. Yeah, internally I have seen that they have a separate IP. If you want, then I can quickly show it, I guess. Let's share the screen. Let's start one of the Docker container start. Oops, it's capital O. Docker exec -it Oracle 11c bin bash. Oops. I have stat. Let's try this one. Okay, I have a Ethernet 0 IP, Ethernet 0 with some IP address right now. Let's yum install ifconfig. Can you give a sample scenario we can use container database for production use beside the development? Actually, Docker. Yeah, I have seen a lot of Docker uses in industrial basis, and I must admit that it is not being used on the. It is mostly being used on the non-RDBMS side. So, in case of RDBMS, where the data are more critical, I haven't seen Docker being used. So, there is one company in my country. It's Logpoint, and they are using Docker extensively. And for the first time, I have heard about the Docker container from them. So at that time, I started investigating about it, and I found it's very handy and very easy to use. Okay, so Yum provides. If only one instance of Oracle database, it is better for performance. One standalone versus Docker or Docker versus. So this Manish, this question is not clear to me. If only one instance of Oracle, then which is better? Okay, got it. If only one of instance of the Oracle database, then which one is better? Standalone server. Yeah, I must say, if you are doing test, then just go for the Docker because it is rising and it has a lot of popularity. So just go for Docker. If you okay, let's basic networking tools. Net tools. Yum install net event tools. Yes. Yeah, if you see that there is a Ethernet 0 and with the IP address of 172.17.0.2. So this way it is internally networked, but you can define, you can map a port using this. So the 15,211 is mapped with the 1521 inside the Docker. Is Docker secure? Yeah, Docker is pretty secure. It is isolated and have a lot of. If Docker container uses snapshot features, then like a virtual box. If not, how do you do? Yeah, we can do a Docker export for the snapshot. So if you execute Docker export and the Docker container name, it will export to a snapshot. Okay, guys, if you have any questions, then you can reach to me. This is my blog address. This is my LinkedIn and Twitter address. And thank you so much for attending this session. And I hope you have learned it.
Thank you very much,
Over to you,
Dillii.
Hemant.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
very much.
Hemant. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And waiting for